That is a beauty guitar riff. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Agronomist. It is Real Ag in prime time. We got a great show for you here tonight. Thanks a lot for joining us here this evening. Tonight, we're going to talk about drill setup. We're going to have so much fun. We have got an expert panel connecting, setting up your drill to the agronomy, and we're going to get to them in a second. Want to remind you that you can participate in tonight's program by entering a comment or question in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. And of course, you can also get CCA credits as well. So, it's hard. CCA credits are hard to come by this winter with all the meetings and conferences kind of canceled. So that's one of the great things about this program is we have a lot of fun, we learn, and you can get credit for it as well. Go to realagriculture.com tomorrow and sign up for, or you can do it tonight, sign up for our agronomist email, and we tell you, hey, sign up's ready, and you can sign up and get your credits and take care of the whole shebang. So, hey, tonight we got a great guest list. We've got Peter Johnson, Real Ag Agronomist. He was for 30 years the wheat specialist with Omafra. Recently, he was also named as one of the top 50 influencers in Canadian agriculture. And we also have Phil Needham from Needham Ag Technologies. And I kind of promote it this way in the in my tweet that I have two of the leading wheat experts in the world on tonight's show. Byrne Tobin put it very, very well last week. Pete and Phil on one screen, they're going to break the internet. Let's bring them in and let's get going. Hey, first up, hey, Phil, how are you?
Doing great, Shaun. What about you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. Phil's based in Kentucky. Phil, how are things looking out there? How's the weather?
Looks a lot like spring. It was about 20 Celsius today, and guys are starting to put anhydrous on. We're spraying wheat here. It looks like spring. So for those of you with snow out of your windows, spring will be there pretty soon, I believe.
Oh, it's feeling close. Today was about 10 Celsius, and I think the weekend it's 16. So I know how both of you feel about early seeding wheat or early seeded wheat. It's when we get that kind of weather, it's maybe considered go time. Also joining us is Peter Johnson, based out of Ontario. Hey, Pete, how are you?
I'm awesome, thanks, Shaun. And by the way, so cool to be here with Phil, like a real expert, and I'll go along for the ride. That's good, but I like it. Ralph breaks the internet. That's
Yeah.
what we're gonna do tonight, baby. That's hilarious.
Yes.
Good deal.
Yeah, and Ray's commenting as well that Pete dressed up for the occasion like he always does. You look good in that jacket, Pete. It looks really good on you.
Yeah, just always trying to show you up, Shaun. That's the focus. Show up, Shaun, if we can at all.
I wore a golf shirt tonight, not a t-shirt, so we're good. Okay, hey,
it.
let's get to some of the tonight's content, and we're gonna get to some clips tonight as well, of course, like we always do every week here on the Agronomist. Phil, let's start with you. Last week we did planter setup, and I kind of felt bad because the planter gets so much attention. Why is that? Because, Phil, I've watched through some of these clips I have with you and Pete, and the reality is that the drill setup is just as important as the planter setup. What gives?
Sure. So I would say, a lot of people say corn is king. From the number of acres and the gross revenue generated by a corn crop, it's much higher than wheat or canola. So I tend to think that drills or seeding technology, air seeders, etc., tend to go by the wayside a little bit. The planters tend to get the priority, and that's where a lot of the research and the money gets spent.
Yeah. Pete, I know this bothers you.
Drives me nuts. So in 1972, we perfected the Max Emerge corn planter. And to this day, there's been a few minor improvements, but not a tremendous amount. Like that was a real innovation. And we are still using 1950s technology to put wheat seed in the ground in 2021. And by golly, it's time we developed a better seed drill. And I'm really disappointed that Phil hasn't done it yet, because if anybody should be able to do it, it should be Phil. Phil, I'm counting on you, man. We need a better seed drill.
Yeah, some of the manufacturers in Europe, as most everybody's aware, they've had singulation on some of their air seeders for at least 6 years. So I think it's coming. Some of the technologies are introduced over there a few years before they are over here, but there's definitely some of those technologies available in the world, just not really made their presence in the US yet.
Why haven't they? Phil?
There's more money available generally to a European producer by means of higher yields. So I think that's a driver. If you consider an Oklahoma or a Kansas wheat producer that's making 40 to 50 bushel wheat on average, there's just not the money there to invest in a multi-$100,000 seeding unit.
Hmm.
That's kind of my general opinion.
Yeah. Well, and of
And it's all
course, go ahead, Pete. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's also acres, right? So when you look at
Right.
acres like corn, it really is the driver here, soybeans, and there's lots of acres in Western Canada, but as Phil points out, that's not where the big yields come from. And so you go to the UK and corn isn't king. Like they don't even call it corn, they call it maize for crying out loud, whatever that is. I
That's
have no
right.
clue, but like wheat is king there and rapeseed, canola, and you move across Europe, like wheat is the main crop for most of that area. So if it's your main crop, then you tend to focus in on it more.
Hmm.
Whereas here, the main crop has remained corn, and so that's where the dollars have been spent. And the other thing I would say is it's the same as with chaff spreaders on combines. I mean, they can get chaff spreaders on combines in Europe that are far better than chaff spreaders we get here, and you just go like, how come? Well, the farmers here just have to start screaming and saying, no, wheat is an important crop here. Cereals are an important crop. We want this best technology. And some of my German farmers here in Ontario, that they don't wait for John Deere or Case or New Holland or whoever to bring that technology here. They go to Europe and bring it back themselves. And so they're keeping up with the Europeans because they're doing that.
Yeah, well, I know that Tom Wolfe has some of the same. He says the same stuff about sprayers. That there's technologies available on the European sprayers that European producers enjoy. That we have not seen that technology come across to North America yet for a number of reasons. We're going to get to setting up the drill here in a second, but I'm going to go to John's question because we were talking about it, Phil. If a Kansas producer had a better drill, could they increase their yields by 20%? That question from John watching on YouTube.
And I would suggest it depends a little bit where he is. What kind of rainfall has he got? Has he got irrigation? If he's in eastern Kansas with higher rainfall, where it's not moisture limiting, better seeding equipment, narrower rows, better depth control, better singulation. All of those would be very easy to increase yields. If you're in northern Kansas, northwest Kansas, where it's drier and rainfall is more limiting most years, perhaps there'd be some small benefits to singulation, but you're not going to see the yield response that you would with higher yield, higher rainfall regions. So I guess it depends a little bit where he is and his yield potential now as to what kind of a yield response he could likely achieve with better seeding equipment.
Yeah, and Phil, all I'd say is that John asked it the right way. He said 20%. So if I'm a 40 bushel yield wheat grower in Western Kansas, could I pick up another 8 bushels per acre by doing a much better job of depth placement? And if moisture is the only limiting factor, then maybe not. But 20% is a big number. Let's be real. To gain 20%, that's a very big number, John. Could he gain 10%? I think there's 10% there for a lot of producers, not just the guys in Kansas, like everywhere. I think 10% is in the cards. 20%, that's a big step.
Okay.
And the other piece of the puzzle is, most research around the world, including that out of Europe from Horish, that's had a pretty good singulator. It's not perfect, but they've been able to achieve equal to better yields with equal to slightly lower seeding rate. So if you can singulate every good quality seed to a singulation similar to a corn planter, I think there'd be some benefits there from a seed saving perspective.
Absolutely. Well, and Danielle beats Pete to this. She maybe he stole it from Danielle. Danielle watching on Facebook says singulation is important, but most air seeders and drills are controlled spilling machines. Pete, that's
freaking that's all they are is controlled spill devices. And no, I was not the original person to come up with that. Everybody knows I am the ultimate thief. I will steal stuff like that from anybody. And actually, I used to quote the individual. I can't even remember now where I first heard it. Might have been Dave Townsend from it's first said it, right? I'm Shaun, Dave Townsend, but regardless, and that's why I come back to we're using 1950s technology, and we just should be able to do better than that.
But I think the fact is, our Shank machines are getting better and better, are they not?
Yeah, I mean, 40 years ago, and I'm not going to pick on different brands, but 40 years ago, guys had big, wide sweeps, 10, 12-inch spacing. They were wanting to control weeds. They were wanting to get some tillage, to get some warming effect. The depth control was pretty marginal at best. And for the time, the capacity was there. The yields were okay. It was saving a tillage pass, and they worked okay. But more and more recently, as guys want to go more towards zero till, and a hoe drill isn't a zero till tool, it's almost a full tillage tool if you got sweeps. All I'm saying is the seeder technology, especially with the Paralink type seeding equipment, the depth control has improved dramatically. But later on in the presentation, I think we've got a slide or two, and we'll talk about different hoe drills too, because I know we want to touch on hoe drills in addition to single disc or disc drills too. Okay.
Yeah, well, you know what, Phil, I was going to pull up that graphic I gotta just get some stuff off the screen here. I was gonna pull up from some pictures that you. I got a lot going on over here, you guys. I'm gonna pull up the picture of the 4-inch sweep. Should I do that? And we can look at that, and you can.
Yeah. Why don't you start with the first image, Shaun?
Okay, hold on.
Because that would be a good backdrop to where we're going.
Yeah. Okay. Just hold on here. Like I said, I got lots of stuff going on, you guys. Okay, right here.
Cool.
That one?
Yeah, so let's talk about this for just a minute. So I guess to start out from a 30 or 40,000 feet elevation perspective, I grew up on a family farm in England. My grandfather farmed all his life, and I think he was the 3rd or 4th generation farmer, and we farmed some too. So I think I'm the 5th now generation. But my grandfather always told me when I was small, well sown is half grown. What he meant by that is if you can do a good job placing good quality seeds in the ground to a consistent depth, primarily on narrow rows, because most of the European seeders are on narrow rows, then you're halfway towards good yields. So well sown is half grown. I've always remembered that because that's kind of really important, because you need to do the best job you can to create the potential from the very start. I mean, it's a long odds gamble. If you're gonna fall over at the starting line by getting uneven emergence, it's going to be really hard to time your fungicides, especially fusarium fungicides later on in the season if it's wheat. So you've got to get every seed in the ground to the same depth, ideally in narrow rows, so they all emerge at the same time. So to quantify the performance of how different seeding systems perform in the field, we do a lot of these. This is what we call a stand count. So we're just taking a yardstick and we're counting the number of emerged plants. We throw the yardstick out in the field at random, and we're counting the number of emerged plants per yard of row. So counting all the emerged plants down the yard of row, and we're writing them down on a notepad, as you see on the left-hand side of the image on the right. So in this example, we got 14 different stand counts. So it gives you not only an average, which we convert into square yard, which was 276, which is an important number, but you also need to see how that average is composed from a point of view of highs and lows and what kind of variability you've got. So stand counts are really important for us to be able to compare the performance of different drills. How does one drill compare to another one in similar conditions? This image was taken in the Red River Valley near Borgo, so dark black soils, clay soils. This was zero tilled into soybean residue. So there's a lot going in this picture, but just remember the well sown is half grown, because you've got to start out with a bin busting stand if you want high yields at harvest time.
Yeah, it makes sense. Pete, I know you feel very much the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a whole range of things, right, that can go with this, but uniformity, we're learning more and more. And it's not that this is brand new, but we finally have some technology that we can do something about it with. And so in the corn world, we've learned how important uniformity is. And we're starting to see that in many crops, and wheat is no exception. And so trying to get that uniform stand becomes really, really critical. And we can talk about that more if you want, Shaun. I mean, certainly a bunch of slides, but
yep. Well, I'm going to show this one more picture, Pete. Here, look
Yep.
at this one. So this is a 4-inch sweep, and Phil and I were talking about this before we went on the air. You know, that's from one machine. Look at the difference and what the plant structures look like based on the depth that seed was put into the ground. Pretty visually staggering, Phil.
Yeah, and this is just an example within a row, but generally the 4-inch sweeps are very, very soil moisture and soil type sensitive. So if you set the sweeps, 4-inch sweeps, for example, to a given depth, even at a slow speed of 4 or 4.5 miles an hour, the looser soil types move around more soil. The back ranks start covering up and cause what we call stepping. So the back ranks are tossing loose soil on top of what the front rows have planted, even at slower forward speed. So you get differences in seeding depth. And when you get different seeding depths in wheat, the left plant on the left-hand side of the screen, that was seeded about an inch deep. And you can see we've got one healthy tiller on the left center, two smaller tillers, and then one tertiary tiller on the right side. So a main stem, two tillers, and a small tiller. Now compare that to the plant in the middle that was planted about 2 inches deep. As you can see, we've got a slightly smaller main stem and a tiller off to the left and a small tiller forming on the right. And then lastly, look at the image on the right-hand side where we've got a plant seeded or a seed seeded 3 inches deep. We've only got a main stem. So all of these are the same variety, same, planting day. Everything is the same apart from the seeding depth. Well, number one, it changes your emergence date because obviously the deeper planted seed comes up later, and it also generates different amounts of tillers per plant, which obviously adjusts your plant population when they're seeded to different depths. So if you don't mind, Shaun, show me the next slide because that really quantifies where we're going with this image. So this isn't my work. This is some out of Saskatoon. The researchers are stated on the top of the screen, and this came out of a crop science research publication. And this basically shows, as you see on the top of the screen, relative seedling emergence patterns. And it shows that 72, looking at the top bar, 72% of the seeds emerged over a 3-day window when they were seeded at a 1-inch depth. Now, that doesn't mean they all came up in 3 days. That means from the first seedlings emerging to 72% of the seeds emerging took place in a 3-day window. Now, if you go down one bar to the 2-inch bar, 50 millimeters, it shows that 79% of the seeds emerged in a 5-day window. And then lastly, if you drop the seeding depth all the way down to 3 inches, 81% emerged over a 7-day window. So remember those numbers and show me the last slide if you would, Shaun. So this is really where the rubber hits the road. So averaged across 2 years, this is replicated research, okay? So averaged across 2 years, they found that wheat plants that emerged on day 1 to day 3 produced 1.4 times the yield of those which emerged on days 4 to 6 and 3.2 times the yield of those which emerged on days 7 to 9. So obviously at the bottom, it kind of summarizes it in a simple statement. This research demonstrates the benefit of shallow, number one, shallow, and consistent, two important topics right there. Seed placement of large seeds, there's another important topic, in minimizing variation in time of seedling emergence among plants and increasing yield. So I thought that would be good by means of setting the stage here this evening.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Just told I'm going to come back to maybe. Hold on here. There we are. You know what? It does, Phil, because, okay, so we know that consistent depth, the emergence being very, very similar is incredibly important. So now let's go to the how do we actually do that? So Pete, it starts with the drill setup. What are some of the things that you think are the most critical right off the bat, Pete, to really be considering?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to get into drill setup, man, it all comes down to maintenance. And so you really, if it's a brand new drill, there's still maintenance. You still have to do all those setup things in the field the first time. Make sure it's level. Make sure that you're getting the right amount of down pressure on each of those row units. One of the things that a lot of guys often do, they'll think, oh, well, if I set every row, with at 3 notches and 2 notches, that they're all at an inch deep. Man, with differential wear on the bearings and on disc blades, you really need to put it down with them all set at 3 and 2 and take a 2x4 or something that you can put underneath that depth gauge wheel and make sure that in fact they're all at the same depth, because I've been astounded sometimes at how much difference you can get. So disc wear, it's a whole bunch of things. Maybe you want to go to that clip that Phil put together, but those are really critical, and hopefully they're already done, because as Phil says, they're in the field there. We're soon going to be in the field. Hopefully we're in the field in 4 weeks or 6 weeks at the very most. So if you haven't done that, it's time to get the drill in and start doing that maintenance. Measure discs, look at bearings, just a whole range of maintenance that I never get around to, but is really, really critical.
Well, what are you doing? You got to get
right.
What have you been doing all winter?
Okay. Nothing, Shaun.
Okay, you know what? Let's watch the first clip about, and what Phil's doing here is we're at a field day. I believe it's in Ontario, going through some different types of drills, but there's some great tips as he walks through each one in terms of some of the things you really got to be considering before you hit the field. So let's watch that first clip. Here's Phil out in the field. Here we go. Let's pull it up. Here we go.
Okay, we're here today at the drill setting calibration clinic. We've got a number of drills and air seeders. This is a smaller 15-foot, 1510 HD Great Plains, 7.5-inch spacing with the turbo coulters up front. And basically what these provide, as they would on a turbo till, a Great Plains turbo till, they do produce quite a lot of tillage action. And for guys that want to level soil, incorporate residue, they do move quite a lot of soil. Now, not everywhere wants to, or not all regions want to move this much soil, but the most important thing for guys that have this or are looking at technology like this, the most important thing is to make sure that these coulters, or no-till coulters on a planter, not that I really like them on a planter, but the most important thing is do not run these coulters deeper than the seeding depth of the double disc openers, because you can end up with what I call a false seed floor in the seed slot, meaning if this coulter works 2 inches deep, your disc openers are working 1.5 inches deep, depending on the soil and the area within the field, some seeds will go to the bottom of the slot created by the disc openers, or the no-till coulters. Some go to the bottom of the slot created by the double disc openers. So you've got differences in seeding depth. So don't run these any deeper than your double disc openers. A little bit of moisture in the soil, quite a bit actually. When we ran this seeder a while ago, you can see the soil actually sticking, there's still moisture here, still sticking to the double disc openers, bubbling quite a bit of soil out. So we've got some soil disturbance created by the no-till coulters up front, quite a bit of soil disturbance created by the double disc openers in this example. Probably the most important things that growers need to be aware of, the soil conditions in this field are actually pretty loose. Look how loose the soil is here. So it doesn't take a lot of down pressure, it doesn't take a lot of no-till coulter penetration to achieve uniform seeding depth. So in these conditions, you don't need a lot of down pressure. On this drill, you've got 5 different options. In this example, it's in the lower option. From a point of view of down pressure, it's doing fine. As your soils get harder, then more down pressure is going to be required. In some examples, you're going to have to add weight to the seeder. So in the hopper, seed and fertilizer level drops below a certain point, you're probably not going to have sufficient weight across all openers to achieve consistent soil penetration with this configuration. So you may have to add weight. There's different closing wheel configurations on the market. This is a pair of closing wheels. Probably works better, in my opinion, in higher moisture soils where you're struggling to close the slot. The slot remains open. This closing wheel configuration really does better in that environment. If you're seeding into drier soils, I prefer the 2 or the 3-inch wheel that runs directly over the seed slot, but not a bad configuration if you're looking for more soil disturbance. So this is a John Deere 1890. It's got 7.5 inch spacing, which is the row spacing we recommend over 10-inch rows. Obviously we get a little bit higher yield from 7.5s than we do 10s. This is you can buy these on eBay. It's a digital angle finder. What we do with these, or what I like to do with these, is I like to zero it on the frame. So give me just a second. I'm going to zero it on the frame. Then I'm going to clamp it. It's magnetic. I put this angle finder on this 4x4 rock shaft. Okay, right now the hydraulic pressure is actually seeped off, we've lost angle, but this 4x4 rock shaft is really important for the operation of this John Deere single disc opener. The more you rotate this 4x4 rock shaft backwards, the more it compresses this spring and the more downforce it creates to push that disc opener into the ground until the gauge wheel contacts the soil surface. So that's kind of a mouthful. Obviously you can adjust the gauge wheel up or down to increase or decrease your seeding depth. This is how you do it with this adjuster. And obviously you can adjust seeding depth assuming you've got adequate down pressure on this spring. So as you rotate this rock shaft to horizontal, meaning parallel with the top of the frame, this 4x4 rock shaft, or slightly backwards, if you have sufficient frame weight on the seeder, you're going to add more downforce via this spring to this opener to cut into harder soils or heavier residue. So a sharp blade is obviously required. A new blade is 18 inches. We recommend replacing the blades when the bevel is lost or the edge becomes dull, or when the blade reaches around 17 inches. So these are whichever comes first. In most examples, the blade starts to lose its edge, then it doesn't cut, then it hairpins. So a sharp blade, preferably 17 inches or above, is obviously the way to go. So these are some things to think about to maintain better performance with a John Deere single disc opener. So the last drill that we've been looking at and analysing and discussing here today at the session is the case. This is an SDX 40-foot machine, single disc, again 7.5 inch spacing, similar to the other drills that we've discussed today. This one's a little different to some of the others. It still uses a single disc with a radial arm, which is obviously what we're seeing right here. Again, it takes a spring to press the radial arm into the ground, obviously adjusted by means of a rock shaft, similar in design to the John Deere. However, this disc drill has a larger blade. In this example, this is a 22.5 inch diameter blade with a gauge wheel that's a little bit further back compared to the John Deere. So a larger blade, we've actually found, takes quite a lot more, a significant amount more down pressure to press it in the ground relative to an 18 inch disc blade. Okay, it actually runs at about a 5-degree angle to straight forward. The John Deere is about 7.5. So obviously what the idea is to move soil sideways to create enough shadow to fit the seed boot down into. Not that this is really a seed boot, it's really a deflector that the seed is positioned within, and then the seed drops down into the shadow created by the disc. The gauge wheel principle is similar to the John Deere, in which the gauge wheel is actually regulating the seeding depth. So as long as you've got adequate adequate down pressure, pushing this disc blade down until the gauge wheel contacts the soil surface, this is going to guarantee you consistent seed depth as long as you can press the disc down. So the SDX is a heavier frame, everything about it is heavier compared to the John Deere, but they do need more weight because of the bigger blade. So everything's good here. It doesn't have a firming wheel. Firming wheels are available. This is the mounting point. All it takes is a pivot and an arm. In my opinion, the firming wheels are pretty important to press seeds down into moisture, especially if you're seeding into marginal moisture soils. If it's going to rain the day after you seed, or you've got lots of moisture present, it's not an issue. But if you're seeding into dry soils with moisture available at the bottom of seeding depth, it's very important to press those seeds down into the base of the seed slot and then cover the seed with loose soil with a closing wheel assembly similar to this. That is the best approach. But we would recommend definitely a firming wheel added to these drills to press those seeds down into moisture.
That video was from a wheat school. It was filmed at a C&M field day in Ontario by Bern Tobin. And of course, you can find more episodes like that at wheatschool.com. Okay, Pete, give your evaluation. How did Phil do there?
Well, Phil's the guru, right? But I will take exception to at least one thing that Phil said. And what's really interesting is the depth of the tillage coulters on a drill like the Great Plains drill. And so Horst Bonner, the soybean guy in Ontario, and myself, we ran around for years with a John Deere 1560 drill with a Yetter coulter cart mounted in front of it. And we did all these trials at seed depth. So basically running at that 1.5 inch kind of depth. And we also, if the soil was dry, and that's the one thing that I have to say, is that you couldn't put the tillage coulters down into mud. If you did that, that's all bad. But man, when we ran those tillage coulters deep and actually got a little bit more tillage action, a little bit more black dirt, on average, Horst was picking up about a bushel, almost a bushel per acre more out of the soybeans. And it seemed like the root on the soybean plant was able to go down more easily in that early growth phase. And we never did see that concern about the seeds dropping to the bottom of the trench. And maybe that's because we weren't doing it when it was too wet. But the other beauty was we planted some beans on some incredibly tough clay where a 10-foot drill, we couldn't get the thing hardly in the ground without those tillage coulters. And to me, that means we weren't there early enough. I mean, good grief, if it gets that dry, we should have been there earlier. But boy, to get the soybeans to moisture, we really needed those tillage coulters to add that fracturing and not, at times we were trying to pick the wheels right off the John Deere drill off the ground, right? We were that much downforce. So that's Ontario experience. And I know there's lots of people who say, no, don't do that. But in Ontario, unless it's super wet, we would actually say that you can get away with running those coulters deeper, at least in our trials.
Interesting. Phil, anything from that video you want to hit on again?
The only thing I'd add to Peter's point, he's got a good point there. The big thing about coulters, what they offer in that situation on a drill, like what we showed, is definitely some leveling action. So if you're out there, you got some sprayer tracks, combine tracks, grain cart tracks, any kind of tracks in the field, you drop them coulters down in the ground, they will work and loosen and level that soil some. The only challenge is you get into certain environments like Kansas where moisture is limiting most years, especially western Kansas. They don't want that much tillage because there's a lot of moisture loss associated with the tillage action. So I guess it's a little bit regionally specific. The only thing I'd add is that video is probably 10, 12 years old. That was before I started dyeing my hair gray. I think the Case 500 was released in 2007, and I might be off just a year or two, but the SDX was retired and replaced with the Case 500, I think in 2007, okay, which is a newer drill, more similar to the John Deere 18-inch blade, but with a parallel linkage.
Yeah, Phil, believe me, between you and I and Pete, the one thing RealAgriculture provides, not only agronomic education, but a real timeline of how all of our hair has changed color. So don't worry about it.
It's okay. I'm the old dog here. That's for sure. So just one other thing that Phil didn't mention on a drill like a Great Plains, they have good down pressure, but if you don't have that tillage coulter lined up with the double disc openers, you can have real challenges. And on some of the drills, with an offset shank, like it can be quite challenging. So that's another thing just to pay attention to. Make sure that those tillage coulters are lined up. And yeah, just tons of good stuff there. By the way, that digital angle finder, I really like that. It's such a cool toy. I got to get one for my brother. He's into gadgets. I got to get one for him.
Well, and Jason has a question. Jason has a question about it. What would be the process of the zero angle finder on a 3310 single disc Borgo?
Well, the 3310 I'm pretty familiar with doesn't have a rock shaft, so you'd be measuring things that aren't present on a 3310. So I'm not saying you couldn't benefit from an angle changer, but you wouldn't have the same benefit, or you wouldn't be able to do what we're showing on the John Deere drill. You could obviously use the angle finder to make sure the machine's level front to back, side to side. Apart from that, I'm not sure there's a benefit.
Okay. What else I got here? Just reading through the. Okay. The size of one of the things that I got from that was actually, I'm going to talk about the blade here in a second, but it had to do with the closing wheel based on soil type. That was kind of interesting, Phil, from that video, in terms of based on the kind of soil you have, based on the kind of conditions you have, you may want something on the back end, different on the back end of that drill.
Yeah, and the only thing I just realized that Jason Vogt on the topic, he said 3310. I think 3310 is the Paralink. Then he says single disc. So I was thinking he meant 3310 Paralink. If he's talking about the single disc drill, yes, you'd have a benefit with the angle changer, but I think he meant 3810. I think that's right. Message me if that's not right. Shaun, you asked about different closing wheels on the Great Plains, right? Different closing systems.
Yeah.
So yeah, the one in the video has got a pair of closing wheels on the back of the Great Plains drill. Same technology as a corn planter. And you can put different wheels on there. You don't have to have the two factory rubber 1x12 wheels. You can swap them out for anything else you want. But they tend to do better in moister soils because they do squeeze the seed slot closed from both sides and do quite a good job in moister soils. And again, you get out into Kansas, into looser soils, they want to press down from the top. So a 2x13-inch wheel, for example, generally does better and leaves a depression right over the seed slot. So if you get any moisture at all, it tends to drop into that seed slot to get you some moisture, to get you some emergence. Okay.
Yep. Great stuff. Well, and there's probably some people that have a shank drill that are saying, you know what, I don't want to go the disc drill way because I'm worried about hairpinning and having to manage and worry about that residue. That's a common thing that I hear all the time, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Shaun, you can, if you want, pull up that first slide in my slide deck. You don't have to. It's just that what you
just want to challenge me is what you're trying to. This is what you're doing. No, hold on. I'm going to do
it. Okay. All good.
Okay, hold on. Give me a second.
Like both Phil and I are of the opinion that disc drills, we can do a better job of getting a uniform stand. And most of that comes from the fact that we control the depth right where we put the seed in the ground. And yes, the new hole drills are much better because they have the Paralink. They have some drills, hoe drills now actually have a gauge wheel in front and a gauge wheel behind each hoe, just to try and get that walking action, get that seed depth. But man, hairpinning is a real thing, and it seems to be worse in Western Canada than it is here in the East. And maybe that's a moisture thing. Maybe that's just how tight the soil is. We've farmed it long enough that the doggone concrete around here, it gets so tight that the soil acts like the ledger plate, and then the disc just slices through that residue, and we can get hairpinning. But it's not the issue it is in Western Canada or in Kansas and in the Western US either, which is really kind of interesting. But in this particular trial, this is from Brian Barris, and we've got him looking at ultra early seeding now, which is way cool. And this was 4 different seeding dates or 5 different seeding dates, and over that whole time frame, when they looked, the knife actually did a better job from a yield perspective than the drill. Now remember, this is ultra early, so a bunch of this was seeded when the soil temperature was, I think, 0 Celsius, or at the very least 2 Celsius. So I think, Phil, 2 Celsius is about 36 Fahrenheit, right? So really early. And 2 things can happen with the knife. One is, as Phil said, as soon as you have a hoe drill, you are not a no-tiller. It's not a chance you are a no-tiller. You are a conventional tillage farmer because of all the frickin' soil those things move. And the faster you go, the more soil. But ultra early, we created that black soil. And so that soil would warm up faster than the drill slicing through it. And then the other factor is hairpin. With a hoe drill, this is a 1-inch knife in this particular trial, so you don't we don't have the issues that the 4-inch sweep that Phil talked about from as much variability, but still got variability because we can't control the depth right beside the point of seeding. But yeah, we just don't get the hairpinning, and maybe that's part of this as well. But yeah, every situation's different, but I throw this up just to say that just because Phil and I like discs better doesn't mean they always necessarily win.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great stuff, Pete. Let's watch because we're talking about. Hold on here. There we go. Because we're talking about residue. Let's watch a clip here that Phil actually sent me. This is first time, Phil, showing a clip not in the RealAgriculture.com library. So here we go. Here is Phil talking about residue. Let's get to it.
So we're at a seeding school in Canada today, and we're showing growers the influence that residue management at harvest time can have on seeding performance. And what we're showing growers here, we've got obviously a Case 500T single disc machine, and within this particular band of the field, as we see here, we've got a lot of residue on the soil surface, okay? Chopped straw and chaff, okay? And the result of this kind of straw volume on the soil surface is resulting in some hairpinning, as we can see, but a seed slot that's open in some of these areas because of the wetter soil that's under the residue. So as a result of that, I'd be somewhat concerned about winter hardiness of the wheat if you got a seed in the bottom of a seed slot that's not fully closed. So the impact of winter kill would probably be quite high if the seed slot is not closed. So as we move over, again, this is a pretty damp set of conditions. We're looking at less straw and chaff. Then we get to this point, there's little to no residue at all. All we got right here is about 6 inches of stubble. And as you get into this area, as you can see, the slot is closed just fine. Pretty nice soil, but within these soil conditions, we've got good slot closure with minimal residue. So just a quick take-home message. Lots of residue over there. Here, minimal residue. Lots of hairpin and slot closure issues over there. Good soil cutting, good slot closure here. So residue management can have a big impact on seeding performance.
Well, and the reality is, guys, a lot of this starts at the combine, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've seen new seeding equipment, brand new seeding equipment taken to the field, and if the residue wasn't spread very well, it's a disaster. You've got great stands in areas where there's no residue, and where the residue is streaked behind the combine. You know, there's poor stands. If it's winter wheat, you got poor winter hardiness. There's all kinds of depth control issues, but that video pretty much summed it up. There's, I guess, the big things there. The combine did a really poor job spreading residue. So you got heavy streaks, light streaks alternating across the field. And under that heavy residue is moist soil, because obviously where there's heavy residue, the soil doesn't dry under the residue. So then you got the component of what I call differential soil drying, or differences in soil moisture across the seeding equipment. Either way, but then you got hairpinning because you got heavy residue that's damp because the ground underneath it doesn't dry because it's covered in this mass of residue. I mean, that's where it starts. I mean, I'm always amazed how many people there are in Western Canada that harrow their fields trying to spread residue. And I've been out there with a lot of guys saying, look, you need to spread this residue with a combine, park the harrow, sell the harrow, and buy a better chopper and spreader, just like Peter said in the opening comments. They're out there. Guys are spending the money on leather seats and refrigerators in the cab, but they're not buying the high dollar, high performance chopper spreader combinations that are needed for the wider heads. And I see all kinds of beaver huts in Western Canada with hoe drills where they can't get through the heavier stripes of residue behind the combine after a good crop of wheat, for example. It's a big problem, and we've got to do a better job with choppers and spreaders. Headers are getting wider, faster than the developments at the back of the combine to spread residue. So hopefully there's somebody watching here from some of the chopper engineering departments at some of the combine groups, because it's a big problem. It really is.
Yeah. Pete, I know you're passionate about this.
Yeah, absolutely. It just drives me insane. So it should almost be against the law to have a wider header then your chopper can spread. And if they just, everybody needs more efficiency, right? They're bigger is always better, but it actually gets really tough. If you start thinking about throwing straw, how do you throw straw 30 feet? You get a 60-foot header, you got to throw it 30 feet each way. And now they're starting to talk about headers that are that wide. Man, most spreaders won't spread at 40 feet, and we're going to go to 60 feet just to improve combine efficiency. In fact, in some fields, we've actually gotten now where if the same combine doing a poor residue spread is on auto steer, RTK, always following the same path in the field, all of a sudden we can get potash deficiency in between where the residue doesn't spread, because where you get the residue, there's so much potash in that residue. And now we've created a fertility problem just because we're not doing that good job of spreading the residue. So yeah, just huge issue, drives me absolutely insane. And by the way, my John Deere 9500, I still can't get it perfect. I'm getting close. I got a 22-foot head. We're about 20 foot on the spread, 19 foot on the spread, but there's still a strip there that isn't perfect.
I hear you, man. Phil, let's go to you here. Curtis is watching on Facebook, has a question. Do you see improved row cleaning equipment coming down the line for single disc opener drills?
I'm not exaggerating by saying I've spent hundreds of hours with Martin Industries. I've done a lot of consulting for them over the years. They're just down the road in Kentucky, and they provide a lot of row cleaners for a lot of seeding equipment around the world. And I've spent a lot of time with them looking at different wheels, different angles, different principles. I've also looked at the K-Hart one, the Arix one, the Yeta one, and we've pretty much concluded that row cleaners on a single disc drill work fantastic where you don't need them. Where you absolutely need them, they suck in a bad way. There's just a lot of limitations on a drill. There's clearance. There's nowhere to go with the residue on narrow spacing. So you're pretty much back to the basics of what we talked about, or I had a chance to talk about in that video earlier on. Set up your seeding equipment. Peter nailed that. Set it up. Make sure your discs are sharp. Make sure your residue spread. Leave your residue tall and standing. Sell the damn harrows. You don't need a harrow. Harrows hurt more than they help in some situations by knocking over residue and detaching it from the soil surface. So you're laying it down on the ground. If you've got a hoe drill, it's a disaster, because all that residue, if you harrow at an angle to the direction of the hoe drill, then it starts breaking up. But it absolutely starts with well-configured, well-maintained, well-operated seeding equipment, well-spread residue. If you can solve all of those factors, that's going to eliminate the need for row cleaners in most environments. And we've tried all kinds of different row cleaner wheels, angles, designs, different wheels, and just haven't had any luck. I mean, you can look on Google Patents. John Deere has some patented row cleaners. They're probably off patent but the lugs on an 1890, there's two steel cast lugs, I guess they are, on the opener arm assembly. That's for the row cleaner. But we've looked at it, Deere's looked at it, and they never took it to the market. It just didn't work to a satisfactory standard.
Yeah, and for some people outside of some of the Western Canadian geography, what Phil's talking about is with the long tooth harrow. You get a wide unit, put on the tractor, and drive it Mach 10 through the field, trying to lift all the residue up. It's kind of fun to drive the tractor that fast.
Yeah, but just park the harrow and just drive the harrow up and down the field. You get more benefit, I think. It wouldn't hurt you as bad.
so just go to really good cedar forest or down forest. Like many companies are starting to have that now. Man, we did some seeding rate or speed trials with downforce on our drill. We were astounded. We had to get up to 10 miles an hour before we started to lose ground contact. And at 10 miles an hour, we still we didn't lose any yield because we were able to maintain the ground contact. And you want to go fast, just spend more money on the drill. And like Phil says, throw the harrow away. But you can't throw the harrow away if you don't do a good job in residue spread, because otherwise you got to stir it up to get it dry underneath all that stinking residue.
Yeah,
that's right. It starts with a combine. It absolutely does.
Pete, question here from John, watching in Ontario. So how far away from a 7.5-inch row unit that gives all the advantage of a corn soybean row unit are we? Seems to me the tech is there, but we just have to adapt it to small row units.
Yeah, and I think that John's right knocking on the door. So there's a bunch of, as Phil said, there's a bunch of European companies looking at that. If you look at the Michigan State trials, they went with a monosome corn planter and they planted wheat, and they could get the monosome corn planter down to 10-inch rows. The real challenge becomes that as soon as we go to a depth gauge wheel on each side of where we put the seed in the ground, it gets harder to get those units closer than 10 inches together. And with wheat, we'd really like to get them even closer together than that. So for me, I'm way more interested in finding ways to get perfect uniform seed depth. And that is where we're going to see big gains. We'll figure out how to get narrow rows. There's gains to be made there as well, but we can already do that if we want to. It's really a 7.5-inch row unit. We have to figure out either stagger them more or some way that we can get depth gauge wheels that'll do that perfect job of placement. And I think, John, part of the problem is if we do that, it makes the drill mighty expensive. And are you going to be willing to pay for it once you put all that technology on? Is another challenge that the equipment manufacturers have.
Yep, for sure.
And look at Borgo's website. Borgo now has a single disc drill with a parallel linkage and a firming wheel and a seed boot, all of the ingredients that you need for a good seeder, and they've got singulation. So you can singulate with a positive seed metering system. You can singulate all crops. So they're really going after the market of being able to plant corn or soybeans and wheat on narrow rows, all with the same platform. So I think that's certainly got some merit and worth a look at. I've not seen it. It's recently released. Obviously, COVID's kind of limited a lot of travel for a lot of people, so I've not seen it, but I know they've got one. It's on their website.
Yeah, and Clean Seed is trying to do some stuff in that market as well with that smart seeder as well.
That's right.
Phil, question here from Jason. Is there a particular company or brand of zero-angle finder you would recommend?
I tell you what, if you've got an iPhone, there is an app. I might look for it here or tell you later on what it is and you can post it. But there is an app on an iPhone that actually gives you the ability to, within a degree or less, it's an app with an angle finder. You can do about anything with an iPhone. And I mean, any angle finder is fine, but if you got an iPhone, that's your tool right there.
Yeah, but can you actually keep it on the rock shaft, Phil, as you drive down the field? Will the iPhone not fall off the rock shaft?
Yeah, good point. It's not magnetic.
Yeah, it may be cheaper to buy the angle finder than put your iPhone on the rock shaft.
Absolutely.
Unless you need a new phone. That's right. That is a process. We got more time here. I want to show the last clip I'm going to show is to do with wheel diameter. And I found it very, very interesting because there's a lot of things to consider here as Phil outlines. I really like this video, and we'll chat about it. Here we go. Here's our last clip of the night. It is right here.
We started out today at the Disc Seeder Clinic talking about different blade diameters and perhaps some of the interactions that different blade diameters cause. And we talked about the Great Plains starting out, it's almost rubbed off, but the Great Plains actually use a pair of double disc openers that are 15 inches in diameter. And what's important to know, if you're seeding wheat 1 inch deep, so measured from the seed up to the top of the soil that's above the seed after it's planted, you've got a distance right here, and I call this distance A. So that's basically the point at which the disc enters the soil at soil surface level to the distance where the disc exits the soil. You've got a distance here, which is what I call distance A. And I'm assuming the blade is going this direction. You've also got this angle here, which is the angle at which the disc enters the soil surface and hopefully cuts residue right there. So that angle, what I call angle B, is very important because the steeper the angle, closer to 40 to 45 degrees, has actually been found, lots of work around the world has actually been found to cut soil and residue better. So as the blade diameter gets bigger, for example, a John Deere with an 18-inch blade, this distance A, again from where the blade enters the soil to where it exits the soil, is obviously greater than with a 15-inch blade. So it starts increasing the amount of force required, assuming all the angles of the blades remain constant. The force required to push this blade into the ground with a greater contact patch increases. And the challenge is, with a bigger blade, this angle B, obviously as the blade enters the soil, begins to decrease. So as that blade angle, as it enters the soil and residue, decreases, you actually end up with less effective residue cutting and potentially more hairpinning in heavy residue or a damp soil. The SDX, such as what we're standing by right now, has a 22.5 blade, and some people maintain, well, you don't have to replace the blade as often. However, it takes a lot more force because, again, this distance A from where the blade enters the soil to where it exits the soil is much greater than an 18 and obviously much greater than a 15. So as a result of the larger blade, it requires a lot more frame weight to push that larger blade into the soil. And the easy comparison that I give guys is if you got a narrow spade 4 inches wide and you jump on it in a given soil type, you'll probably push it in the ground a long way. But if you have a spade twice as wide, it's much more difficult to press into the soil. The other negative of the larger blade is this lower angle right here. So as the blade diameter increases, this contact angle here of the blade intersecting the soil surface and residue that's on it decreases. And when that angle decreases, it can and often does have a negative impact on soil cutting and can increase hairpinning. So for the most part, an 18-inch is a fair compromise between good penetration, not a huge amount of force required to press it in the ground, reasonable angle to cut residue, and a reasonable blade life. But again, as the edge begins to be lost, on a John Deere, for example, as the blade diameter drops below about 17, you start to lose the edge, you get more hairpinning, the blade needs to be replaced. And that's the same on all blades. So be looking at the branded drill, the manufacturer's recommended diameter to replace the blades, and don't wear them further than that.
Lesson: keep those blades sharp. Don't think you're going to get a few extra turns out of it when it gets to a certain wear point. I think it's pretty important point of discussion, Phil.
Yeah, and I work with a few different grower groups across the country here. And what we try to do, you might get 10 or 15 or 20 growers together that you work with as a group. And we take them out into fields and try and do a tour and get to see and experience how different growers are performing with their seeding equipment. And I've always said lightheartedly, nothing encourages a grower to do a better job faster than embarrassing him. And what I mean by that is, if all the farmers show up on one grower's field and he's not got the best stand, and these growers are always picking fun at each other. They all know each other, and they look at the guy and say, "What the hell did you use here?" You know what I mean? And just the guy just tries harder. He gets different seeding equipment, or he maintains it better, or runs it slower, or spreads residue better. But what I'm getting at is, if you can travel around as a group, whether it's 10 growers, 15, 20, and compare stand counts, compare uniformity, compare emergence across the field, you can learn really quickly what works and what doesn't. It's that simple.
Absolutely. Hey,
So
Pete, go
Phil,
ahead,
just on that diameter, if I can, because I get this question, like on my John Deere drill, they start at 18, I get to 17, I change the boot. I take the bolt out, I raise the boot up, and I can wear those things down to 16 inches. John Deere makes the drills so I can do that. And you're telling me it doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's in the operator's manual, and that's a big discrepancy in my opinion. The challenge with that is once your single disc drill openers on a John Deere drop below 17, the sharp cutting edge, the bevel has gone. It's long gone. So if you got heavy residue, hard soils, and you need to cut it efficiently through soil and residue, 17's the absolute minimum. I mean, I talked to a guy the other day that bought a used drill, and he was thrilled to death with it. He said it's in great shape. The blades are at 17 inches. And I'm like, so they're wore out? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, they're wore out at 17. The sharp edge is gone by the time they get to 17. So there's a little bit of, I'm going to call it education involved on some producers. And I'm not picking on everybody. I'm just saying there's some producers out there need a little help and encouragement. That's a lot of what we do, okay?
That's what we're here for. Absolutely. Question here. I like this on seeding speed. From Jason watching on YouTube. What would you say should be the best seeding speed for a disc drill versus a hoe drill? What do you think, Pete?
Yeah. So I really think that it depends a whole lot on how much down pressure you can get on that single disc drill. As soon as you start to see any hop in that single disc drill, you're going too fast. But typically you can go a little bit faster with a disc drill than you can with a hoe drill. Most of the hoe drills, you start going much over 4.5 or 5, and they really start to pull back a little bit, and you start to lose some of that depth control. As I said, we use the John Deere 1590 at 10 mile an hour with cedar force, with that controlled down pressure. I think you could do the same thing with the Borgo drill. We demoed a Borgo drill that had the exact same kind of technology on it. And so where are you at from a technology standpoint will just determine how fast you can drive. But yeah, it just, if you're driving to the point where you're getting that bounce, then all bets are off. Then you're just going too fast.
Yeah. Phil?
And the other thing I might add to that is that the row spacing has a big impact on hoe drill speed. The narrower you bring rows together on a hoe drill, the more soil disturbance, the more stepping you've got, which again is the back rows tossing soil on top of the front rows. And that's why some of the Western Canadian manufacturers want the wider spacing so they can run a little faster without tossing all that soil around. But yeah, row spacing has an impact, and you can get single disc drills on 5-inch spacing. You have to modify them yourself, but you can put 3 ranks on a John Deere 1895 and get 5-inch row spacing, minimal disturbance, high forward speed, lots of capacity, and all the benefits of narrow row placement and fertilizer placement in the row. I mean, there's all kinds of benefits to the narrower rows.
Okay. Pete, I know you wanted to talk about broadcasting a wheat. We've been talking about setup of your drill, but you're talking about using a broad. What do you want to talk about this for tonight?
No, so so Phil, here's the question, right? And I'm getting this from Michigan, I'm getting it from Ontario, and it just, so lots of guys are looking at broadcasting their wheat seed. Now it's winter wheat, right? So let's be clear, it's winter wheat. Although Shane and I did some trials on essentially the same thing with spring wheat and barley with a Salford air cart going back a few years. And they're going in after they broadcast the wheat seed with a high-speed disc. So, you know, what one of these very European-style high-speed discs that really control their depth very, very well. And they feel like the acreage benefit they get by being able to do so many more acres is overcoming any negative yield impact of that process. Plus, they're actually, and I think part of this is because they do get the seed seeded earlier, that their yields aren't looking to suffer compared to their neighbors who are running a drill. So I just throw that out there. I'm getting that question lots. Michigan State has started a research project on it. We did it a few years back, but I'd like to hear your comments, because that question is definitely out there.
Sure. So there's definitely some benefits to broadcasting, which would be, in theory, equidistant seed spacing. They'd be random, but they'd be very better. The proximity of the seeds, randomness of the seeds on the soil surface, there'd be a benefit to that. It would be like ultra narrow rows. The downside, where the wheels often drop off, number one, guys are trying to spread the wheat with a spinning disc spreader that may or may not do a good job. If it's patent tested, feels level, it's not windy, maybe they'd be okay. If you had an air truck, you could overcome most of them weaknesses as long as it was well maintained and operated. The challenge is most times the wheels drop off if you spread the wheat on top of a bare soil surface. There's wheel tracks out there from grain carts, sprayers, combines, everything else that are slightly depressed by an inch or an inch and a half or 2 inches. You throw that wheat seed on the top, then you go across the field with a piece of tillage equipment. You're throwing soil everywhere. Before you know it, the seed's at 2 inches deep in the wheel tracks, covered up with the soil. Then there's other areas where it's shallow. Then you got the challenge of the seeds are not at the same depth. Some are, even in the areas without wheel tracks, some are an inch deep, some are a ½ inch deep. A few might be on top. That's my challenge with it. So I think it goes back to the type of equipment, like a turbo till that mixes would probably be better than a sweep that's throwing a lot of seed and soil everywhere. But I mean, as long as you do a good job, I think it goes back to how well the seed is spread, how uniform the soil surface is before you spread the wheat. As long as there's not a lot of wheel tracks, I think it could work to an acceptable level. But you've not got some of the benefits of fertilizer placement. I'm the biggest advocate, almost as big of an advocate as Peter Johnson, with placing FOS in the row. We've got to get the FOS in the row to concentrate it, and then you kind of lose that benefit with broadcasting. So there's a lot of different topics that are involved with broadcasting wheat, okay?
For sure.
Yeah. And so in our trials, just if I can finish on that, Shaun, we saw about 10% lower yield to a broadcast application than when we drilled it. Now, the only challenge was that if you couldn't get over all the acres with the drill, then you got zero yield on the acres you didn't get in the ground when you have those really narrow windows and the rain is coming. So that was kind of the caveat from that perspective.
Phil,
and the only other aspect is soil moisture. If it's a drier fall and you may not be able to get that seed pressed into moisture positively with a drill, that could be a weakness also.
Phil, here's a question on, let's go here. Do you see a net return on precision upgrades on drills similar to row unit planters?
So we were gracious or lucky enough to have a prototype Cedar Force row by row, and we had that, I think, 3 years ago. So precision planting, we basically took two identical single disc 15-foot John Deere drills. One was stock with all of our modifications. One had all of our modifications plus Cedar Force, and we conducted that first year 2 replicated trials where we compared Cedar Force on one drill with row by row technology to a stock drill. We had the same amount of seed in it. We had the same amount of ballast on the back. We didn't even get into the topic of ballast tonight, but ballast is another topic that's really important in harder soils or heavier residue to keep the openers engaged in the ground. But if I remember right, we saw a 4 or 5 bushel per acre response, and it was 100 plus bushel per acre wheat when we did the trials to the Cedar Force compared to no Cedar Force. So we really liked the technology. I mean, in the tractor cab, watching the monitor, we could see the active downforce changing. I've even got images where the residue wasn't spread super well, and we were seeding at a small angle to the combine passes. The down pressure was changing in response to the differences in residue. I've even got a map, a planting map, a downforce map, showing the time of day and the impact that residue moisture had on the amount of down pressure on the drill. So we're learning a lot about it. The benefits of it's huge. I mean, guys have been buying Delta Force for 8 or 10 years for planters. It's the same technology for a drill. It's just a lot of money. And we're back to this same topic we said earlier on about singulation. There's a pile of money involved. You've got to be able to cover the acres and have enough yield response to benefit from the outlay of the money, okay?
Yep, absolutely. And Pete, you've been doing some work with Joanna Follings on some of this precision tech, have you not?
Yeah, so we're like Phil. We have a drill set up with Cedar Force now, and we had that in the fall of 19. We didn't get it until later in the fall before it was ready to go. A huge shout out to the directors of Middlesex Soil and Crop for supporting that research project, because, man, along with precision, with our trials planted late into wetter conditions, we really didn't see any yield benefit that particular summer or that next harvest. This fall, we went on some sand soil. It was dry. It was really amazing, as Phil says. So we're planting wheat into corn silage ground, and the front gang is taking 400 pounds more down pressure to get it in the ground than the back gang. And I still haven't got my brain around why that was, but it happened several times as we did those trials in the field. The difference in uniformity, we haven't harvested those trials yet, but the differences in uniformity was just quite amazing. And so we're excited to see what the results are. Again, will it be enough, consistently enough to pay? We don't have that data yet, but really exciting stuff in terms of trying to move that bar forward for sure. And
Okay.
it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier on, Shaun, with the depth control consistency and the importance of depth control consistency in yield. That cedar force system, I mean, you're setting a margin. You're setting a margin of contact on that gauge wheel, and the system is adjusting up or down the hydraulic force on that cylinder to maintain that margin on the gauge wheel. So it's ensuring target seed depth because that gauge wheel is clamped against the soil surface with a given amount of force. It's great technology. You just got to be able to pay for it and justify it.
Well, hey, the market's headed up.
Yeah,
it
doesn't matter what it costs. There's just so much money in agriculture. It just simply doesn't matter, right?
I didn't say that. I did not say that. Okay. Oh, here's a good one. Question from Brady watching on Facebook. Do you think stripper headers solve a lot of residue management problems? Phil, you want to tackle that one?
Absolutely. The gentleman that brought me to the US in 1989 purchased the first 2 stripper headers in the US right out of college. Actually, I worked for Shelbourne Reynolds, so there's a little link there. Yeah. But yeah, the gentleman that brought me to the US became a dealer. He's actually the first dealer or distributor for stripper headers in the US, so got a lot of background with stripper headers. I'm going to say absolutely yes in drier environments, and you can Google any amount of research from the drier environments. There's a massive yield response. I shouldn't say massive. There's a significant yield response to stripper headers from a point of view of moisture retention, and that's where the biggest benefit is. But if you can leave that residue standing as uniform as you seeded it, rather than giving your combine the biggest opportunity to screw it up with a wide head and poor choppers and spreaders at the back, then there's a big benefit there with the stripper headers. So I'm a big fan of stripper headers. The challenge is you get up into the Dakotas, the Red River Valley, for example. I know there's some guys running them successfully there, but they tend to leave the ground wet and cold. And for spring wheat growers, that sometimes delays planting, it delays maturity, and there's some issues there. So they've definitely got the place, but it's generally in lower rainfall areas for the most part. That's where they're best positioned, okay?
So, good fit for Montana, good fit for southern Alberta, Swift Current in southern Saskatchewan.
Definitely.
I only know one person here that uses them. You don't see them very often.
I mean, there's a lot of benefit. I mean, it increases your combine capacity by maybe 20-25% because you're not running all that volume of material through the combine. Yeah. Less fuel usage. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it, but the biggest benefit to me is exactly as Brady said, it's solving a lot of the issues with residue management because it's leaving that residue as uniformly positioned as you seeded it. So as long as you did a good job seeding your crop, your residue is tall and standing as uniform as it was when it was seeded.
Any thoughts on stripper headers, Pete?
Yeah, so I think the only reason that you're not seeing more uptake, Shaun, is they don't make them wide enough. They're so heavy, and it's just hard to get a 40-foot or a 50-foot or a 60-foot wide stripper header. And guys, as Phil says, you can go faster. A grower that lives not too far away from me bought one and it has had it's a real learning curve how to use a stripper header, because now all the grain is basically coming in almost thrashed. And so everything, if your combine's not set up right, all the grain falls through at the very first. You're not really needing the rotor to do much separation, all those different things. And it really does take some different management and figuring out how to utilize them as well. It's not as simple as hooking on the stripper header and just go to the field.
Yeah. True. So true. We're running out of time here. Last question via YouTube from Jason. What would be the most management tip that we can influence on wheat seeding? Seed soil contact, downforce, or singulation? where we can improve where can we improve the most? Pete, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm really I keep coming back to looking at the highest yield growers, and it's always uniformity. It's uniformity, uniformity, uniformity. And to get that uniformity, I really do think it's downforce is probably where we get there the most, because as Phil said, now we're getting more accurate seeding depth. And in all the corn trials that we've done, man, getting everything to emerge as close to possible at this on the same day has a huge impact. So I think it's there. I think singulation is good. I don't think it's as important as accurate seeding depth. Certainly, isn't in the corn world. I'd like them all, by the way, Jason. I'd like them all if I could, but you're going to make me pick one. It's downforce.
Phil, how about you?
I would just ask the question, playing devil's advocate here. But when I do these grower groups and we go out into fields, I will often ask the group of growers, what are the top 2 or 3 yield limiting factors in this field? And they'll say depth, they'll say consistency of depth. Very rarely do they ever discuss residue management. Maybe Jason forgot about it, but I'm just going back to residue management. That's a bigger problem in many fields than any of these topics discussed here in Jason's question. But going back to Jason's question, downforce is very important. Going back to what we learned with the cedar force system, being able to set a gauge wheel with a given amount of margin against the soil surface, not too much down pressure that you're causing sidewall compaction, ensuring target seeding depth because you're pressing that gauge wheel down against the soil with a known amount of force. You've got wheel track differentials, where you need more down pressure. You've got softer soil types where you don't need as much soil downforce. I would say downforce is good because it's ensuring target seed depth. And then probably second, I think singulation has a lot of opportunities. We don't have hybrid wheat yet. We keep hearing rumors that there's hybrid wheat coming down the pipe. I think if we get traits in wheat at some point down the road and the cost of seed per unit is very expensive, I think we'll be able to use singulation to help keep seed costs down without a yield hit. So I would say downforce number 1, followed by singulation. I think seed to soil contact on most drills with a firming wheel is pretty good now, is all I'm getting at.
Great stuff. Great stuff. I think Kent said it very, very well. The dream team is finally live together. Excellent stuff. I hate to cut it off, but we have to at some point. We'll just keep on going, and eventually Pete's got to get to bed. So
you really did need to make this one 2 hours, Shaun, because we didn't talk about ballasting. We didn't talk about tires on drills. I mean, Phil mentioned the 500T. Man, the amount of compaction on a 500T with the standard tires that they come with, I see them on the headlands. I see them in the field all the time with poorer growth. There's a whole range of things that we didn't get to. So, but cool stuff nonetheless. So, yeah.
So you're right. We did not talk about tire pressure. I feel
it's
like
not just pressure, right? But it really is. So, I mean, we are kind of at the end of the night. I don't want to open up a new can of worms, but I did have those two slides. No, I apologize. Those 2 slides where you can clearly see where those 500T tires ran, and it's not just the 500T. If you have an air cart and you're running bias ply tires, oftentimes that air cart's giving you a ton of compaction. You'll see reduced growth there, but I really notice it the worst on the drills where the tank is on the drill. And when you put all that weight on the drill, those center tires, they're just not big enough. And we are seeing those impacts in the field in a major way. And it's too bad because you could have higher yields.
Well, you made me think of like there was a period there where it was like who could get the widest. We can get wider and wider and wider, and the tank's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, it's like who the heck is going to pull this through the field, and what about the compaction? The weight of these units is definitely something we've got to be thinking about, Phil.
Yeah, some of the bigger air carts now weigh upwards of 40,000 pounds. I'm talking about 1,000 or 1,150 bushel cart weighs 39 to 41,000 pound empty. And then you put in 950 to 1,150 bushels of seed and fertilizer in there. So the compaction is massive if the ground conditions are moist. But I will continue and add to what Peter said. I really prefer a separate air cart to having a hopper on top of a cedar frame, because the 500T, the 1990 John Deere with a hopper on top with no weight transfer out to the wings. That's why they brought out air carts 30 or 40 years ago or more, is to separate that dynamic weight change of seed and fertilizer. Hopefully you put in fast in the row, but you're separating the weight of seed and fertilizer from the toolbar, so you can set the toolbar on a row by row basis all the way across it without having that changing seed and fertilizer weight have an influence on seeding performance.
Great stuff. Hey, I got it. Well, we're gonna end there. I really do appreciate it. Jason Vogt had a good point. We'll have to do a part 2 at some point here and bring Phil and Pete back together. This was a lot of fun tonight. I really appreciate everybody joining us. Phil, thanks a lot. I really do appreciate you joining us here on The Agronomist. We'll definitely want to have you back.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the offer.
Absolutely. That is Phil Needham of Needham Ag Technologies. And Pete, sharp dressed man and smart too. Thanks a lot, man.
Oh yeah, sharp. The sharp dressed. I'm not so sure about smart, but hail to Phil. Hail to the guru. Absolutely. Yep.
I learned so much. I just loved it. It was fantastic tonight. Great stuff. Hey, everybody, I want to remind you that you can go to realagriculture.com tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe to our agronomist email. And what we do is we remind you that this show is on Monday nights, and then the next day we tell you, hey, you can qualify for your credits. So I encourage you to do that. Absolutely. And if you have any troubles registering for your CCA credits, just contact me and we'll figure it out and sort it out. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in tonight. Don't forget always to check us out Monday nights, Real Ag in Prime Time. There's no other show like this. It is live. You get to ask your questions, and we get great experts to get them answered for you. Everybody have yourselves a great night. Cheers, everybody.
Take care.